All right, so afternoon, everybody. We're going to start with Nicholas Trotter to go over some BVI information.
Let me give a little bit of context first. So just real quick, y'all may have heard us talk about the Governor's Committee on People with Disabilities has asked TEA back in 2019, asked us to bring together an advisory committee of folks to crank out some recommendations around digital accessibility for students with disabilities, including those who are deaf and hard of hearing or blind, visually impaired. And so so that group has been working, and when COVID hit, they kind of went into high gear and have helped us create a few different documents to assist LEAs and provide guidance for LEAs. They were woven into several of the things that we created over the spring and into the fall. But they have just recently published on our TEA website 2 documents, one of which is specific to digital accessibility for students who are blind and visually impaired, and the other one is specific to students who are deaf and hard of hearing. And so all of that said, just for some context, Nicholas Trotter is our coordinator of services for students who are blind and visually impaired. He's new to TEA. We're super excited to have him here. He's great. And with no further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Nicholas.
All right, thank you. Ed, I need the ability to share this document here. What will that change? What happened?
Zoom gives Ed all kinds of powers. I'm surprised it hasn't gone to his head yet.
You should be able to share it now.
All right, let's try this again. Hey, here we go. All right, so you all should be seeing the document, correct?
Yes, sir, we are. It's kind of weird on Zoom because you can't see what you're presenting, but as we see it, but we are seeing the doc.
Yeah, okay, all right. So they asked me to come in today and share this document with you all. It's on navigating accessibility for blind and visually impaired students. This first section just kind of sets it up, the purposes. So it identifies some accessibility issues for all students and educators, and then it delivers some more specific content for those students who are blind and visually impaired. And I will go back and forth through those terms just out of comfort, but know that I'm referring to all students who have visual impairments, including those who are blind and reading Braille. And then we get to the alt text section here. Alt text is simply providing that invisible text that your screen reader would pick up. Hang on. All right, here we go. That alternate text that a screen reader will pick up so that those who don't have visual access to the picture can still get information. And when we have alt text and you want to add it to a image in Word or PowerPoint, it's super simple. You just right click on the image and select edit alt text. Other programs will have similar functionality, but you'll have to play with it a little bit to figure out how to do it in each individual program. If you'll notice here, there's a picture of George Washington crossing the Delaware. And depending on what your purpose is of including the image, will really dictate what information you're giving. If you just have if this is just from a document about George Washington and you've included this image, it might just say George Washington crossing the Delaware. But as you'll notice, if you read, it gives some examples about if you're talking about the actual artwork, you might have different information. Or if you're talking about a different aspect of it, you might give different information. And if you're going to talk about it at length, you'll want to talk about it in the text because, as this note here at the bottom says, many programs will let you just type away when you're including alt text. However, most screen readers will stop reading at about 140 characters. So if you think about the old standards of a tweet, that's what you get. You get a tweet for an alt text in terms of it being read. And so if we scroll down a little further here, I think we're on page 2 now. Yeah, page 2. It discusses headings. Headings in general are important to guide a reader through a document. For a student with visual impairment, it becomes even more important. And when I say headings, I'm not talking about just bolding something or putting it in the center of the page. I'm talking about actually using, and I'm referring right now specifically to Word, but other programs have these same features. Specifically referring to using those headings that you see up in the ribbon on the top of your page and using that structure. And what happens if you've ever used your active table of contents where it automatically populates by your headings, that same structure is what is being read by the screen reader. So a student with visual impairment will be able to quickly skip through the document to get to the pertinent information. If you're, say, in a science lab and you want to go over the materials, but that's the third heading down, instead of that student reading all the way through the document to get to that, now that student can go through the headings and say, oh, here's the section I need, and then hit some keystrokes, and it'll actually read what's under that heading. And it's real easy. I wanted to point out that it's real easy to change a heading format. I know sometimes you look at these headings and you're like, well, that's not what I want it to look like. You can stylize your text any way you want, and then go up to that ribbon for, say, heading 1, right click on it, and click update heading to match selection, and then everything you put under heading 1 will automatically change to that style throughout the entire document. Lastly, on headings, and it's noted here, if you have text in your document that's not an actual heading, but you want it to be bold or centered or whatever, do not use the heading setting, because it will read it as a heading instead of just as part of the document. Scroll down to external links, and I'm also going to include download links here, which is really the next section. When creating a link, you want to use human readable text. What does that mean? That means instead of writing in www.tea.texas.gov, what you're going to do is you're going to have it say TEA, and then it would be a link to the website. That's easy to do. Excuse me. You can write your link in, hit space, and it'll, your web address, hit space, it'll turn into a link. Right click on it and go to edit link. And from there, you can actually change the text that will display, and it will give that reader a better idea of where they're going than just some random web address. Especially when you get into, if you look on the document itself here, it has this link down here to a Google Drive document. If I hear that, I'm like, Google Drive, but I don't really know where I'm going, right? There's just a lot of extra information that the screen reader will read, but the student's not going to know what's happening. And then referring to that link, if you're going to put a link in where it goes to a document or something that's going to be downloaded, give a little heads up in text that, hey, this is going to go to an external source or an external download. I know that personally, I hate when that happens as just a visual reader of a document. But when I also am trying to use a screen reader, it would be very difficult. If we scroll down to audio descriptions, here, you have a couple of links that are very good, a very good explanation or demonstration of how audio descriptions work. The first one here in the document asks you to watch the video with your eyes closed and see if you can tell what's happening. It is a trailer for a movie. The video itself doesn't have a whole lot of audio dialogue occurring, but there's a lot of stuff going on in the video. And then in the second video, it has the professional voiceover done to it, where it's describing what's happening as it's occurring, to give those students a better idea of what's going on. And there's also a link here to 3Play Media, which has some more information. Something that I wanted to mention, let me find out my notes here. Something I wanted to mention that's not actually on this document, that is another good resource for educators, is dcmp.org. It is the Described and Captioned Media program. This is a free loan program, or free loan library of accessible educational media that is supported by the U.S. Department of Education. It has some great video pieces there. Then the next two sections are just some good resources. Some might be geared towards vision, and others are just geared toward accessibility in general. So you can peruse those at your leisure. And then we get to page 4, the last page here. Just quickly, the resources for adapting educational materials. These first two links are to a project called Past Illiteracy. That is something that is done in conjunction between the Perkins School for the Blind and the Texas School for the Blind and Visually Impaired. It has a lot of good information about creating educational materials, adapting materials, that sort of thing. And then also the Perkins website actually just has a lot of good information on it as well. And if you haven't ever heard of Perkins, it's in Watertown, Massachusetts. And you may recognize the names of a couple of their students who were Ann Sullivan and later Helen Keller. So they've been in the field for a long, long time. And then you have also here information from TBVI, the Texas school, on how to get materials embossed, meaning put them into braille, and who to contact there, and then also some information about their TSBVI accessibility coordinator, and how to get a webinar, some free webinars for accessibility. And Texas School for the Blind is a great resource for our state, for our field. So reach out to them. I know Kate Borg over there, the outreach director, would be more than happy to direct you to the right folks. And then this last section is resources for Braille. It gives you information about who to contact in the state to get some materials in Braille. And then the last point down here refers to Braille ready format, or BRF files. Those are files that can be read by a refreshable Braille display, which is an AT device. And this tells you how to get them, to go to Bookshare to get those files. Bookshare is a free digital library that is also supported by the Department of Education and OSEP. And I wanted to point out, this refers to Braille specifically, but Bookshare also has books in DAISY format, which allows them to be used on a digital audio player. And the student can navigate those documents by letter, by word, by sentence, by chapter, by page, so on and so forth. Can search those books, all sorts of things. Has a lot of accessibility built into that format. And it can also, they have some books in MP3 format. And most importantly, that website is not just specific to folks with visual impairments. That website is designed for folks with print disabilities. And so students who have an IEP that's related to a print disability, dyslexia, some autism students have been able to qualify. I've even had students, heard of students on a 504, you know, maybe they broke their arms and are in cast for 6 weeks. Well, they can't turn pages of a book. And so they're able to qualify for Bookshare for a short period of time. So that's one that you really want to share far and wide amongst your special ed folks. That is all I have. I don't know if there's any questions or if we're ready to kick it over to Emily for the other document.
I haven't seen any questions come up in chat except for about the link, and so I have provided that in chat. And when Emily's through here, I'll go ahead and navigate through and show you folks exactly how to find this on your own, teach you to fish rather than feed you. But so thanks, Nicholas, for that. That was great. Next, we'll go with our resident expert in, sorry. When you have things pop up and you get distracted and it's not good when that happens during a webinar. I gotta turn all that stuff up. Emily Robinson is our resident expert in education for students who are deaf and hard of hearing, and y'all have known her for the last few years. She's been a great addition to TEA, and she's gonna walk us through a similar document that was created to address the needs of students who are deaf and hard of hearing.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and do a screen share now. Okay, can everyone see my screen? All right, perfect. I have to move the interpreter so I can actually see her at the same time. And this apparently is a common issue with those deaf and hard of hearing trying to access these virtual calls. We've got to get situated before we start. Most of these resources are from the National Deaf Center. It was established here in Austin, Texas through the University of Texas. And it's really been a great resource for us to have here locally. They have created this document in response to a lot of disability access needs that they predicted were going to happen all over college campuses. And a lot of these can be applied directly to our needs in our schools as well. Really, the bottom line that you have to understand is that we've got to be flexible. There is no one size that fits all. Just not available. Every student has an individual need and a different, thing that will match what will solve that for them. Depending on the subject, some students prefer to have an interpreter for a specific class, and then in other classes, they would prefer no interpreter or CART, which is captioning. So you really have to engage with the student and their family to figure out what is the best fit for their needs. Also, since we have now switched to virtual learning, we're hoping that a lot of these accommodations that were already provided in person were already established, but now with virtual, we know there's some different needs. such as a hard of hearing student preferring to use an FM system. Sometimes the amplification device just to listen in the classroom was great and didn't need other accommodations, which, you know, is okay in person. You can actually pick up on lip reading and other things that are going on. But when we're all virtual, the needs are completely different. We have a lot of noise distractions going on at home. Usually you got a dog barking, the microwave beeping, some of those other things that are coming up, and students aren't able to focus on the screen. And so it's very limiting to lip read, especially, or try to see everything that's going on. And then you have other students talking and you can't even see them. So cart and captioning might be preferred in that situation as an accommodation on top of their FM system to try to help them listen a little bit. And so those are some considerations. I just say we have to be flexible. Next, just talking about captioning, I do want to emphasize that captioning is, you know, there's a lot of YouTube videos out there that tells you how to do automatic captions, but you should know that is not truly accessible. For deaf and hard of hearing people, it doesn't work because there's a lot of spelling errors, a lot of grammar errors, a lot of wrong words are used, or it completely disappears. The information's lost. So it is preferable to have a third party actually come and provide the service, or yourself, you can actually create your own captions, but of course that would require a lot of extra responsibility for the teacher. But it can be done. It is possible. Also, during a webinar or meeting, there are some ground rules that need to be established, and they can apply to almost all meetings, not just those for deaf and hard of hearing. You want to make sure that you set up like housekeeping rules to begin with. Maybe ask all of them to actually type their responses or questions into chat or the Q&A box, depending on which features you actually have and are using. Also, we need to be asking the students or the teachers to name the person before they start talking. For example, when you want to introduce, you know, a new speaker or a question and the audience responds, you should mention that, John, you go ahead and answer, or it is Sally that is answering now. It is your turn. And that really is helpful to the person to know who's speaking. And it also helps the interpreter or the cart to identify and include that information in their accommodation. Also, make sure that everyone is muted. No talking, no background noises. It really does minimize the background interruptions as much as possible. And another thing that's unique to those deaf and hard of hearing students who might have an interpreter, when you have to split the screen, when you share your screen and the interpreter shows up in a small window, they may need to pin the interpreter so that that's who they see. And I know that in Zoom, they have some new features that have just come out. And I think that there's going to be frequent updates where we're going to be able to do more things like as Zoom, you know, as adding captions. They're not great. They're not ideal. I've used it several times. It misses a lot of words that were said, but it's coming. We are improving all the time, and I think that the important thing is to communicate with the family and the students and make sure that everything is working for them. Okay, the next part of this document is related to the video platforms. If you use an interpreter, you really do have to make sure that the interpreter can actually be seen and they can see the student. The interpreter may have to pin the deaf person, and the deaf person then has to pin the interpreter. So it goes both ways. There's a little bit of work to be done. The interpreter and the teacher need to have a very good solid background. My background is not ideal, sorry, but it should be a solid dark color behind them. And it's very important that you actually don't use like the TEA background, which we all have. And it's because when you start moving, it blurs your picture into your background. And so that's why I don't use the TEA backgrounds, because it actually does make it harder for us to understand sign language. The person who is signing must wear clothing that is contrasting in color of their skin. I've noticed the interpreter today is wearing all black, And that is contrasting from her skin color, which makes it much easier to read her signs. Also, another thing to consider, or a luxury that we would prefer to have, is, especially that for Zoom, you get fatigued really quick. We've got to limit stuff to 2 hours on Zoom. After that, your eyes really start to become fatigued. And so be sure to watch out for that. I have offered, lots of breaks, allow a student to leave. Don't, ask them to stay on Zoom all day, because it does cause headaches, eye fatigue, and lots of other issues could come from that. And another thing of this final paragraph here is that don't cancel your service providers that you've had all along. The most important thing from this section that you should know is that we should be trying to provide consistent services. So if a student starts out with a specific provider for their CART or a specific interpreter, we would prefer to keep them the whole time if we could. That means that the whole semester, or a 6-week or a 9-week period, we should set that up for consistency with the student. And it also helps the student in a lot of ways, because the interpreter is already familiar. They know each other's style. They know the class and the teacher and the content. Is very helpful. Also, I do want to emphasize that we should not be using auto captions or auto-generated captions to replace an interpreter or CART at any time. It is not considered equal access. And once again, please feel free to reach out to the National Deaf Center if you'd like more information. Basically, we are steps away from them. We can walk over to their office. They're there at any time. I have a great relationship with all of them. And they continue to put out lots of information specifically for deaf and hard of hearing college students. And so really all of that can be applied to our K-12 most of the time. All right, I think I'm done. There was one last little part here talking about resources that I've included some other links for you on the next page. And there's just a lot of different resources that are already available for accessibility. Okay, any questions so far?
Haven't seen anything in the chat or the Q&A about that except for the links. So if we get anything up, if y'all have questions later on, if you dig into this, you can always get a hold of anybody of us at TEA by sending an email to the sped@tea.texas.gov inbox, and then that goes to a generic inbox, and we have folks who go through that every single day and farm those emails out to whoever might be appropriate. So if you have any questions about either of the 2 documents that you saw today, or just in general need some support there, Nicholas or Emily can be reached through that process. We also have that link. We also have a link on our SPED page to the Sensory Supports Network, which also has significant information and supports for y'all. Real quick, I want to share my screen and just navigate y'all to where those docs are, because it's been a while since we've talked through this. So make this bigger. TEA landing page here. The coronavirus tab is pinned right here. You click that. It's kind of weird. You got to click it twice. Click Get Updates, and then that'll bring you to the main coronavirus page. And special education has got its own card down here, separate from special population. So make sure you're on special education. And then there's lots and lots of resources here. The guidebook that was published, we've talked about this on August 7th. We're actually in the process of updating that because there's been several resources created. We want to make sure we can slide those links into this document as well. The resources are published in various places, but this helps put them all together. And then the documents we discussed today are instructional supports. So click on that. There's 2 different tabs here. A lot of things are on both tabs. The same document might be on both tabs, but we created this because several of the things that we were creating this year, going into this fall, were different than the spring. We wanted to be able to bifurcate that for y'all so you could find that stuff a little more easily. The topics are listed right here. Obviously, we're talking about sensory impairments. It jumps you down the page. It's still the same page. It just jumps you down to all the resources that we have related to sensory impairments. And then these are the 2 new ones right here: navigating accessibility for deaf and hard of hearing, and navigating accessibility for blind and visually impaired. So they're both right there. And that's all about that. Back to you, Ed.
Okay, so for instead of getting all the information from Michelle and then relaying it, we decided just to have Michelle come on and talk a little bit about some of the updates for the non-public day and non-public residential material. So I will turn it over to Michelle Salinas, one of the managers on my team that leads all of the non-public work.
Great, thanks, Ed. Good afternoon, everybody. Let me share my screen here. Oops. Here we go. Okay. So today I'll just be going over some new resources we've just added to our website that are specific to non-public or off-campus day and residential placements. And for just a little additional context, these would be for students in special education who are placed by an ARD committee in either a day placement or a residential placement. The things I'm going over today do not also include residential facilities or RF tracker. This will be specific to the non-public schools. Okay, I thought I would start y'all off with a little roadmap on where to find the information and resources I'm getting ready to go over. Similar to what Justin just went over, here you can go to our homepage. In the search field, you would just type in non-public application, and that'll bring you to the non-public placement notification and application website. This website has a plethora of information about day and residential placements. It also links you to other websites that might have to do with funding or other things associated with those types of placements. So this is a great thing to perhaps bookmark and just have as a resource. This year we got some feedback from the field and decided to put out a lot more guidebooks, resources, but also webinars. So a lot of our new 2021 resources will also be available with a short webinar. This first one I'm kind of highlighting here is just a general overview of day and residential placements, as well as high cost fund process flows. So when an LEA puts an application in for either a day or residential placement, a lot of times that's going to generate some sort of state or federal funding. So that's why those two are kind of tied together and why we talk about them interchangeably sometimes. So this webinar is just going to provide, again, a high-level process flow with expected steps and award information. So here you kind of see an example for a non-public day placement. This is from application to funding with funding award information over here to the right. Another new resource we're starting this 2021 school year is a non-public quarterly update. So this will be a resource that we're going to put out quarterly, and the intent of the resource is to provide timely updates to the field, share trends we're discovering as we're doing our facility monitoring of non-public day and residential facilities, and also just answer frequently asked questions. One thing that the first issue of this update goes over is important changes for the 2021 school year. So I would say of all the things I'm going over today, this one is probably going to be the most valuable as far as looking at kind of beginning of the year responsibilities. And again, any important changes or updates that we've made for day and residential placements for the 2021 school year. And I just included kind of an example there. Funding eligibility requirements for day and residential placements and access to state and federal funding has shifted a little bit. And that is actually outlined on the first page of this quarterly update, which is available on our website right now. So again, you're going to get a lot of information out of this one resource, and I would highly recommend this is something you review.
I was just gonna add, we will also, whenever this goes, so this will be linked in the October SPED newsletter, and it will be linked in the corresponding month anytime we make any revisions or changes to it. So you don't have to, we don't want to send out multiple newsletters and things like that. So anytime we make revisions or updates to this, we'll just drop a note in the special education newsletter and have a link so you guys can find that without having to like check to see if there's been any changes on the website for non-public.
Yeah, thanks, Ed. Thanks for interjecting that. And also, I just wanted to highlight, if there's any kind of burning questions you have about non-public placements or facilities, please email those to NP Day and Res. We've kind of started an ongoing list of common topics and commonly asked questions. So we're happy to take additional suggestions for topics. Another big resource we are dropping for the 2021 school year is reintegration guidance. Again, this will be in the form of a webinar and or a PowerPoint with notes so it's fully accessible. So reintegration plans are a required component of any non-public placement. We did a review of our 1819 and 1920 applications just to kind of get a feel for, you know, where are the challenges, where are we seeing roadblocks? And this was absolutely something that kept on coming up as far as a point of clarification that we often have to outreach LEAs for is reintegration planning. And as we've, you know, worked with LEAs and got stakeholder feedback from the field, this is a commonly asked question as well. And the field has been asking for more guidance specifically on reintegration planning. And so we've put this together. It's just about done. It's just an accessibility review. So this should be available on our website very soon as well. Okay, we've also added instructional videos to our webpage. If you're new to a non-public placement, or perhaps you haven't had to put any applications in Teal for a period of time, this Teal application is a little finicky. And so we went ahead and made some videos just as an extra layer of support to our LEAs on how to submit a day application, how to submit a clarification when TEA is asking for additional information, and how to submit an amendment. So we kind of we're trying to hit the top 5 areas that require the most support. And coming soon, we're gonna have how to submit a residential application and how to submit a high cost fund application. So the 3 videos I highlighted at the top, the day application, the clarification, and amendment, are just about ready. Those are also in accessibility review and should be available on our website soon. So those are some of the highlights. Again, we're continuing to make more webinar videos as the year goes on. All of these resources, as I said earlier, will live on the non-public webpage. If you have any questions about or need any support, please feel free to outreach myself or the team at npdayandres@tea.texas.gov. Does anybody have any questions? That's kind of it for me.
So one of the questions that came up is there a timeline or deadline for submitting an application for continuation of services from a 19-20 placement?
Yes, there is. It is 30 days from the open of the application. Typically, our application opens on September 1. We did have some technical difficulties, and so the open date got pushed out, and therefore that 30 calendar days got pushed out as well. On our webpage, we do have a banner announcement that speaks directly to that. So if you go here, it's actually written right here. That's probably too hard for me to read. But it's 30 calendar days from the open of the application. It looks like those are due on October 19th for continuing placements. Any other questions?
So there was a question, can you add the application status of graduated?
That is not just quite yet. That is an upgrade we have requested. So it's kind of in line to be added to our system, but it is not available yet.
Okay, thanks, Michelle.
Sure, absolutely.
So then Justin and I had, well, any updates for us? So one thing that came to us through the ESCs was we understand that maybe late September, early October, there was a training that came out, or a session that came out from TEA where a little confusion got generated about manifestations and how manifestations needed to be done in order of discipline. Talked with the ESCs and then followed up with the folks that did the training. Nothing has changed. The practice is still the same, that, once administration goes through their process and determines what discipline they'd be recommending, at that point, the manifestation would be conducted to determine if it was, in fact, a manifestation of the disability or related to the disability. We heard some feedback that there might have been some confusion on the order in that process. And we just wanted to, when we met with the ESCs on Tuesday, we clarified that we would make sure that folks knew that there was no change, there was nothing different. I just think there was a little bit of confusion, so we wanted to make sure that that confusion was resolved. So if you have any other questions or have any other further questions regarding that, just go ahead and email me, or feel free, if you're on this call, drop anything in the chat or the Q&A and we can address it specifically, but just wanted to clarify that. Justin.
Yeah. So I have a couple of quick little things, not little things, but so Missy Piper asked me in the Q&A when, if you're eligible for the DHH funds, when they can expect those to drop. And this is like marvelous and modern technology. Our grants folks, I chatted that to grants folks, and they told me there were 54 eligible applicants in the state, and 42 of them have already received their NOGAs. And so, Missy, if you haven't received yours, they're working through them right now, and it should be any day now. So, in addition to that, Ed mentioned something about confusion. I think that there was a discussion at the TCASE webinar that seems to have caused some confusion, and I want to just make sure I clarify that. A question, for those of you who don't know or who are not TCASE members, we do we do a webinar once a week with TCASE as well. It's every 2 weeks now. We've moved to a bi-weekly cadence, and it is typically like very conversational. A question came up there regarding whether or not related service providers could serve as the special education teacher on the ARD committee, and posed like in that frame, the answer is no. They can't just sub in for that. However, if you're in a scenario where you have a student who's a speech only kiddo, and in those cases for the ARD committee, you could have the speech path sign off and represent that as well. So that is, when we answered the question, it was sort of decontextualized. That is, something that happens pretty frequently, and then if it's extrapolated across everything. So in general, you cannot have a related service provider just sub in for that special education teacher. However, in a very specific situation where the ARD committee is meeting for a student who is speech only, the speech path can do that, can perform that role. So. Hope that clarifies everything. Sorry for the confusion. Hang with us. We'll continue to, when things like that come out and people are confused about it gets surfaced up through the ESCs, usually, or sometimes directly to me from LEAs, either way. And then it's, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the chat and getting distracted again, squirrel. We'll try and get clarification out there. I'm seeing one in there, Christy Little, your question. Why don't you go ahead and contact us directly about that? We can help you with your question there. Christy Little has a question in chat, but let's get that straightened out for you specifically. That's all I had, Ed.
So the two questions I saw. So we will put out the slides that Michelle sent out. I'll release those. We'll put those out through the listserv. We'll also, when we get the video, we'll try to put them up with the video too. We just need to make them accessible. So that'll take a little bit. It'll take about a day. And then there was a question, and Michelle, please feel free to chime in because I'm going off memory, which is getting worse and worse as I get older. So one of the questions was, do we know how many students with disabilities are involved in these placements? If I'm not mistaken, on an average year, we have about roughly 120 kids in residential.
So total, it's probably a little upwards of 200. The majority of those are day placements. And I don't, off the top of my head, I wouldn't know how many of those are residential. I know the majority are day.
Okay. So, and then another question, the application for the continued placements, that was the October 19th date, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And then Justin, did you, there's two different questions that came in about in the instance of an AI or VI.
We aren't, I don't want to get into all those specifics for that in settings. Yeah, just because it's going to take us down a rabbit trail and we've got to stick to the agenda. So we'll go ahead and pull, we have guidance out about this in some different places. And Ed, if you can help me remember to get it on the agenda next week, I'll make sure we have somebody to talk through those specifics and show you exactly where we have it in guidance.
Okay, so with that, I think that's it for today. And like I said, we'll get those materials up, we'll get the video up, just ebbs and flows depending on how fast Zoom renders it. Sometimes we can get it within 24 hours, or it might be Monday, but we'll get this video posted just like we do often. And if you have any questions, please use the SPED mailbox or the disaster info, and we will see you all next week.